Hi, good morning, everyone, and welcome back to today's session, which we're going to be covering the personal development for leadership and strategic management. Starting off learning outcome 4, and after the learning outcome 4, we'll do a brief discussion on also the assignment brief, for this unit. Now, as you know, I would like to start off with a bit of a recap in terms of what we've covered so far in this particular unit. Now, the aim of this particular unit primarily was to, understand how do we link our personal development, and the skills that you've acquired over the years of experience and related to leadership and management skills, particularly in the context of the organization that you work in. Now, when we look at obviously the aspect of, linking your experience, prior experience, skills, knowledge, that you have, which allow you to perform your job and your roles and responsibilities effectively. What we want to be able to do is, in this particular unit, study the way those skills that you've acquired over the years, or the knowledge that you've acquired over the years in terms of prior experience, how can that be utilized in achieving organizational goals and objectives. So the priority here is to primarily look at, looking at your existing skills, both in the leadership, management, and in general. We're using a skills audit, look at your existing skills, and then try and map them up to see how it will help best achieve, the organizational goals and objectives. So most organizations, for example, if you look at a sales organization, they have certain sales target for the year. And when we look at the sales targets for the year, people working within sales, business development, account management, primarily will be required to meet their yearly sales target. Now, the targets are assigned or given considering their existing skill set, what they've achieved in the previous year, and then managers or obviously department heads or their supervisors are able to set new targets for the year considering their existing skills and what they'll be able to achieve for the organization in the current year. So in the first learning outcome, we basically looked at how to understand, basically it was to look at understanding skills which are required to, when you are in a leadership position, what kind of skills you exhibit, and how these skills help in the creation of, some sort of an organizational strategy plan, which allows you to drive the goals and objectives or mission and vision of the organization. In the second learning outcome, we basically looked at understanding how do we communicate this, vision. How do you communicate this broad document, which is called the strategy document, and how do you, break this down into, day-to-day activities or, day-to-day operational activities for people who work within the company. So as a CEO, as a chief executive, as a manager, as a person in the senior management position, you have a good understanding in terms of what the organization needs to achieve, what resources are required, and, what will be the, efforts required from people to be able to, or staff within the company to be able to achieve that. So how do you communicate the goals? How do you relate them to, on a day-to-day basis to, goals which can be translated into job description for employees working within the organization? So what we wanted to do in learning outcome 2 is to understand how do you communicate this strategic plan or the vision to, employees or staff within the organization, and then what is required for this to be implemented is what we looked at, in terms of various stakeholders. In learning outcome 3, the idea was to look at learning, and development, or learning and development is a continuous process in all organizations. So when we look at that, what we tend to see is that, you have to at some stage within the organization manage your own learning and development. So self-managed learning. We looked at in learning outcome 3 various concepts in terms of understanding how do you develop your own personal knowledge and skills when you are going to take up, or when you are in a management or a leadership position, and then how do these personal skills and knowledge that you've acquired over the years helps you in, being current in that particular role of being a leader and a manager. So here, sometimes when you look at, I took an example of something called, when you look at Apple in the last session, we said, there are a couple of leaders within the organization, but when we look at the chief executive, Tim Cook, and before that, when we look at Steve Jobs, he was more of a leader, a visionary who defined what kind of products, services, user experience which Apple products should provide. and he consistently worked on, creating new products which met the requirements of users, and provided absolutely fantastic experience. So they are bringing out of the iPhone, the Macintosh, the iMac, and things like that were actually iPad. These were his creation. But on the other hand, you had people within the organization like Tim Cook, who was at that point in time chief operating officer. He was kind of running the operations for the company. So he had a finger in almost all the pies of the company's operation. And here, the idea was to understand in Learning Outcome 3, with that example, is to look at using some of the templates which are provided to do your own skills audit, create a personal development plan, look at a SWOT analysis, and identify what skills you have in management, what skills you have in leadership, and how best you can, develop these as you go along in terms of, working within an organization, and over a point in time gain experience. But this experience helps you to develop certain skills which then can be utilized for the organization. So when you look at different types of knowledge, you look at tacit knowledge, explicit knowledge. So when we look at tacit knowledge in particular, that's a knowledge which is difficult to transfer, and difficult to transfer from one person to the other unless you get to experiment, or get yourself involved in actually doing those things. So when we look at things like tacit knowledge, which is gained through experience or activities that you carry out yourself, would be things like bicycling. When we look at swimming, you learn these skills. Once you learn them, you have them for life. So on the other hand, you had what you call the explicit knowledge, where obviously this knowledge can be readily articulated, it can be assessed, and it can be easily translated or transmitted to others. So in this case, when you look at leadership and management skills, we look at the concept of explicit knowledge and tacit knowledge. So leadership skills typically would bend towards, or what is called the tacit knowledge, and explicit knowledge would be more of management or managerial skills, which you're able to acquire over a point in time, either by someone, or gaining experience under as a coaching, under the concept of coaching and mentoring. So all these were primarily, reflections of what we covered in Learning Outcome 3. In Learning Outcome 4 today that we are starting, we're looking at basically understanding, how do we reflect on the benefits of personal development and achievement, and how does it support, the organizational strategy. So I've put together a few deck of slides to understand the key concepts which are given in the indicative content, things like, performance management, performance review, how reviews can be done, and, obviously from a point of view of understanding the different sources of feedback which can be received, which can be received at the end of it when you are actually working within the organization, or, working on a particular role. So let's look at a few slides to understand, Learning Outcome 4. And the whole idea of understanding Learning Outcome 4 is to basically, move our thinking and learning forward. And in this, we are going to be looking at more of a reflection on primarily the understanding that we have done in Learning Outcome 1, 2, 3, and related to personal achievement, personal development, personal achievement, and how it contributes to achieving organizational growth, and a company business goals and objectives on the long run. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask me, and I'll stop you there and then, and feel free to ask me then. Apart from that, you can ask me the questions through the chat route. But what I've got primarily that I'm going to be going through today would be to look at, going through, Learning Outcome 4 with the help of a few slides that I put together. And then towards the end, we have a template that we will discuss, which will directly relate to the distinction criteria, about how you evaluate and review, essentially, not evaluate, but essentially review your personal development plan. The PDP that you actually created in Learning Outcome 3 is going to be reviewed in Learning Outcome 4 to see how do you set new objectives, and how do you set activities and timelines, and how do you go about achieving those objectives. So let's start off with, let's put it this way, the Learning Outcome 4. And here, what I want to be able to do primarily is to start off with the concept of understanding, what is performance management. Now, we've seen that, at some stage, when you start working within the organization, you're given a job description. And when you're given a job description, what tends to happen is there is at the end of the week, month, quarter, or a year, what happens is that your manager or somebody who's responsible, in your case, to manage you, supervise you, looks at conducting some sort of a, appraisal, and that appraisal or, that particular process is called the performance appraisal. So what they want to see is the jobs that you were given, the roles and responsibilities that you were entrusted with, how well you performed on that responsibility. And then that particular concept under which the performance appraisal actually happens is the concept of something called performance management. Now, when we look at the definition of performance management, what do we see is that it has a lot of activities, as it can be seen in the picture that I put in on the slide. But in general, performance management is basically an ongoing process, wherein it's an ongoing process between the manager and the person, or the supervisor and you, and that basically gives you continuous feedback to be able to see and evaluate how you're performing on the objectives or tasks which have been given. Now, this process, which is a two-way process, keeps working throughout the year, and sometimes you will see monitoring, from the supervisor or your department head or your manager. Typically tends to happen on a weekly, monthly basis. If you go back to the example of sales, which I've given as an organization, what you do tend to see is that if you have an annual sales target, it's broken down into 6 monthly, quarterly, and monthly target. And what tends to happen is your manager would review your target or your achievement against those targets, on a monthly basis. And continuously, there is a process of adjustment of these objectives, which is being done, because if we see certain months could be good months in terms of sales, certain months are not going to be so good months for sales. So how does the sales manager help you or give you feedback to be able to achieve those targets, and so that overall at the end of the year you help achieve, you basically achieve your target, but also in the long run you help achieve the organizational target or the sales head's target, because he's working with a number of sales managers. That concept, the concept of performance management. Now, when we look at, performance management, sometimes when you have discussions with your managers and you look at taking targets, the targets, are always discussed, given, aligned, in conjunction with the employees who are actually responsible for driving those targets. So again, sticking to the example of sales, what will happen is if you've achieved, say, $1 million turnover last year, what you want to be able to look at is the organization is looking at doubling its turnover, or getting a 50% growth. So that target is going to translate into individual sales managers' target, and you will see a 50% increase, because that's how, if you individually achieve that 50% growth, and the sum total of all the individual sales managers' growth would actually contribute to the overall of 50% growth for the company. So basically, when you look at those targets are meant to be SMART. We come across this acronym a number of times, and what we do see, SMART is something which is specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound. So when you accept targets, when you're given targets, you always look at them objectively from a point of view of utilizing SMART as a terminology. And here the idea is to understand whether these targets are specific to you. Are they something which is measurable? Are they something which is achievable? Is that something which can be done? Is this, you also evaluate, are the targets realistic? And then you also see that, do you have enough time, resources, to be able to achieve those targets? So sometimes when you look at performance management, it basically is linked. The reason why you've been given this increased target is because it's linked to the organizational strategy of achieving a 50% growth. And these are then measured, on a monthly, I would say in some cases weekly, monthly basis, because if they see that this is not happening or if this is not being achieved, then the augmentation of resources, activity, certain other activities is done from time to time. So you will see that if sales are not happening or there's not enough demand, for, obviously the products, then the feedback from the sales manager would actually help the marketing teams to primarily get into, doing some promotional activities, supporting you with other side of, activities which primarily would help provide, drive demand for those products, and thereby help you in achieving your sales. So sometimes you'll have to look at that. This goes hand in hand. It's a two-way process, and there's a continuous feedback and a continuous revision monitoring, which tends to happen when we look at, the concept of something called, performance management. Now, what we also look at is that, when we look at the, the systems which are put in place, there are two different types of systems. So according to Boswell and Bodrow, what they looked at was the performance systems are of two types. One of them is called evaluative, and the other is called developmental. Now, in evaluative, what you look at is that these systems primarily look at doing an evaluation to see at the end of the year whether you performed in this role or you have not performed in this role. So what they look at is kind of a context wherein the functions have happened, and what is primarily going to be done now is evaluation of the performance, and that will have direct bearing on things like your bonuses, your salary, your incentives, and to a certain extent, it will also look at differentiating what you achieved as compared to some of the other colleagues in the organization having the same goals. In the developmental side of things, what we do get to see is that here the key responsibility with HR, your manager, is to primarily identify the gap areas, and those gap areas, they understand that you have the potential. They also understand that you are performing well, you're trying your best, you're putting in your best efforts. But at the end of it, if these targets are not met, what they look at is that there is a development required, to be done, and this development is identified in the form of learning and development or trainings in particular, and these then tend to be, aligned as activities for you to get into, so that the gap areas that you have, or the gap areas which have been identified, can actually be, filled up, and so that you are able to perform well. So in this case, what you will see is, when we look at explicit knowledge, you will see that you are asked to kind of buddy up. You're asked to work closely with someone who should be able to translate some of these, experiences or the skills which are required for you to be able to perform in your role. So here, what we look at is more of looking at the coaching and mentoring role, wherein the organization puts you into training so that you are able to develop these skills which are required, or remove some of the weaknesses that you have and then turn them into strengths so that you are able to perform well in your role. Now, there are also different perspectives from different authors. So Kunin, for example, and Armstrong and Barron, they have different perspectives in terms of what performance management is required for within the organization. Now, Kunin basically highlights that there are issues which managers and employees simply go through, which is, in terms of understanding how the activities are aligned within the organization. So here, what you will tend to see is that, there is a constant discussion or debate between the managers and, the employees they supervise or they manage. And the idea here is to basically look at coming up with a system through which some sort of evaluation can happen, and that evaluation happens through the process of something called performance management. Now, sometimes here the HR mediates, because some of these procedures are laid out very clearly in large organizations, and these procedures in large companies or businesses tend to be administrative, because every employee will have an appraisal. You'll have a very set-defined role or objective within the organization, and you are basically expected to perform that job or that roles or the objectives that have been assigned in terms of job responsibility. And should you meet them, you get your usual, increases in salary, and maybe 3 or 5 years down the line, you're due for promotion because you've worked in that role for quite some time. You have developed an expertise, and those kind of things then come into being. According to Armstrong and Barron, what they mentioned is that in some cases, performance management is a system which always has a top-down approach. So the manager always has the control or the option to do a review, and in terms, sometimes, they see this as a system which basically looks at, putting in pressure from the top management to the workers or the employees, and there the doing performance appraisal is to basically look at improving performance, pushing down targets, or pushing down objectives of the organization. So here they see it as a bit of a approach which they want to say that this is an approach which is not a true reflection of what the performance appraisals or the system do. They basically said that this needs to be a holistic approach which involves everyone within the organization, and involvement of everyone within the organization would mean that you'll have people, you'll have clients, customers, suppliers, all of them being involved in the process of, performance appraisal. Now, there are different critiques of the performance appraisal as well. And when I say critiques, we are looking at process design, process execution, and obviously manager's role. So let's look at this very briefly. Now, sometimes you'll see the performance appraisals are primarily, are designed for different levels. So you see a performance appraisal which is being done for somebody at the front line, somebody at the middle management, somebody at senior management, and you will see that these performance appraisals are done from an angle of understanding how you need to basically look at picking up areas of gap, picking up areas which require development, and obviously some part of this is also looking at the motivational aspect of it, because you want the employees to be loyal, motivated, and committed to achieving the organizational goals and objectives. So in many cases, what you will see is that organizations, when they put the appraisals in place, they expect these appraisals to include, everything from feedback, coaching, goal setting, skill development. They look at pay determination, legal documentation. So it's a full roundup of every aspect of appraisal being done within an organization. And this is what excuse me, Armstrong and Barron actually referred to, is that this needs to be a holistic approach which looks at all the elements of appraising an activity of an individual when it comes to performance appraisal. Now, the execution of it is primarily down to employees, and also it is also down to the managers, because in some cases this seems to be an administrative process. So every year the HR department comes into play and they will do the appraisals. But in some cases wherein the organizations have functional matrix or divisional structures, you will see the immediate managers also get involved. They are generally involved along with the HR manager to conduct these performance appraisals. So the process of how these appraisals are done within different organizations vary because of three things: the hierarchy, the grade at which you work, or the grade that you have within the organization, the hierarchy that you have within the organization, and to a certain extent the kind of role and responsibility that you execute or are responsible for within the organization. Example here would be when you look at a performance appraisal, for a chief executive, senior management, they tend to be having a slight bit of a different aspect to it, because there the appraisal are primarily related to qualitative factors, things like increase in market share, raise of share price, the kind of profitability the organization is making, is the turnover or the revenue of the organization in terms of the overall aspect of company. And then looking at strategic objectives, which are primarily related to how the organization is performing vis-a-vis competitors. You also look at other bits, which are related to qualitative factors or objectives linked to the long-term mission or vision of the organization. But when it comes to the operational side of things, middle management, lower management, you will see that they will be more related to what is called the day-to-day activities. Here, the appraisals will primarily be linked to achievement of objectives which are defined by the organization or the senior management, in terms of ensuring that these objectives are met. And at the very low end, or at the front end, I would put it this way, they are primarily linked to just the various day-to-day activities or job descriptions which are provided within the roles of which are basically job descriptions for the employees. Now, what is the manager's role? The manager's role is, in this case, sometimes you look at organizations which I mentioned, because if they have different structures, sometimes you will work and report to administratively to a person within the department, but actually you're reporting on the functional side, because you're aligned with a particular division, type of product or services which are being provided. You're basically functionally reporting to somebody else in the organization. So here, what you will see is sometimes there's a bit of bureaucracy which steps in, and that bureaucracy basically looks at ensuring or basically not ensuring that the appraisals are carried out in the true sense. So you'll have an administrative manager who will do your appraisal, but functionally we are reporting to somebody else within the organization. So a case in point, an example here would be when you look at large organizations which have geographical operations. You look at Microsoft, you look at Facebook, LinkedIn, you look at Google. Now, you have lots of employees working in different geographies, but say, for example, if I pick up the example of Facebook, what you will see is that there are lots of programming teams or coders which work within different, sites, but their main coordination in terms of working with the, on a day-to-day basis would be working with some of their other colleagues, but their reporting is primarily to the head office or the main engineering team within the head office, who is asking them to code and obviously write the code for certain pieces of software which are being constructed. But administratively, they're going to be managed at a particular site because of the fact that you will see that there'll be somebody who's an administrative in charge, and he or she's tasked with basically carrying out the functions of managing these employees or staff within a particular location. So sometimes this particular side of things, in terms of when we look at it for performance appraisals, they become a bit bureaucratic. And here what we do see is that there's not enough support from the wider management, in order to look at the aspect of performance appraisals in the true sense. So what you will see is here the managers do not recognize, or are able to pick up on gap areas in terms of skills, and sometimes they're only involved in, managing the employees administratively rather than looking at are they able to perform at the best of their, abilities for which they are actually, employed within the organization. So sometimes you will see managers or administrative managers who basically work with the employees on a day-to-day basis might not be the right people to do performance appraisal, because they tend to kind of see this as a mundane activity or an activity which is not seen to add any value addition, and that's where sometimes the HR or the administrative sides have to step in to ensure that these functions have to be done. Now, when we look at how does the performance appraisal improve effectiveness, how do we look at why is this an important tool within the organization? We are going to look at some of the benefit of why performance appraisals are done, and how do they look at providing let's put it this way, results which are required within the organization. So when we look at things like their effectiveness, we're talking about organizations creating performance appraisals. These performance appraisals, they are put as a system and as a process, and they are basically required. When you look at supervisors or managers, they're actually trained and given adequate training to be able to do what you call, when I say do, they are basically given this as an opportunity to be able to perform what you call and conduct out performance appraisal. So as a cycle, they are given training, and this training is primarily given to them so that they understand the context of this cycle, how it needs to be done. Even before you conduct a performance appraisal or you look at performance management, you are basically being trained as a manager to be able to apprise or do appraisal of your staff and employees, and that requires you to undergo training. And over a point in time, this training process is called the performance management cycle, and there are key players within this cycle which come in and play their part in conducting performance management within the organization. So it could be the department head, it could be line managers, it could be senior management, depending on the hierarchy or the kind of role and responsibility you have within the organization. You have different people coming in and contributing to this whole process of performance management cycle. Now, the process involves planning, monitoring, developing, rating, and rewarding. And I've just very briefly listed out why what are the key things that are done in these individual 5 or 6 different parts. So planning means you're looking at putting down the goals, breaking them down into smaller objectives which can be easily understood by staff and employees when they are given the targets. Monitoring is done, as I mentioned earlier, on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis, and sometimes feedback is also taken during this monitoring process to see if the employees which are required to perform and achieve certain goals and objectives have the required kind of resources to be able to achieve that. Are they in the right set of teams to be able to perform, and are these teams working well to be able to deliver those objectives? Sometimes you will see if during monitoring they find out that there are gap areas or areas in which the team or the individual requires training, they are identified. And obviously, in this case, what does tend to happen is that after training and development is given, sometimes you will see certain employees getting higher responsibility because they tend to exhibit more responsibility towards certain objectives which have been given, and they are given higher responsibility to be able to drive a certain type of objective for the organization. Then we look at the process of rating, which means, you look at evaluating performance, and here the evaluation of performance can be done in different ways. We look at that, and this evaluation of performance can be done through 360-degree appraisal, 180-degree appraisal, using management by objectives, balanced scorecard, performance appraisal, which is one of the techniques that we are studying. And then once this happens, then you see that if the target given and that has been achieved, target given and that has been met, then you are also in line to get rewards, against which, against the goals that you achieved within the organization. So in terms of, let's get into now, after having a broad understanding of why, we need to look at these training, learning and development activities, and then why do we need to look at the process of, appraisal or performance management within the organization. Let's get into understanding some of the assessment criteria related to, this particular. So when we look at the first assessment criteria, it talks about understanding what are the benefits of review and how do we do reviews within the organization. So what I've done is I put together a few key points here which highlight why we've understood why performance appraisals of performance management is done within the organization. But let's look at what are the key tools that we use to review performance within the organization for an individual or for the organization. So let's look at understanding this from a very clear perspective. So let's look at some of the factors like performance review. Now here, the idea of doing a review is to basically set goals, for the objectives which the organization has, and the idea is to achieve those objectives, from a point of view of, meeting that criteria. The second part, when we look at it, is sometimes you will see that you have to learn from experience. So when you have to learn from experience, what you need to be able to do is, when you need to be able to do this is, what you need to do is, so here, when we say learning from experience, is primarily looking at, sorry about this. So when we look at learning from experience, here we are talking about things like explicit knowledge, wherein you are going to be asked to work with somebody, shadow somebody within the organization, and what you are going to then do is look at when you're doing this, sometimes what you have to be able to do is basically follow someone in that particular role to be able to gain that experience and then move on, by working in that role, particular say independently. So this is one of the other benefits of why do we want to do review. So sometimes when you do review, you will see that organizations will highlight that this person has achieved this. So in a particular role, going back to the same situation of sales manager, if there are 5 sales managers, what you would see is that if one of them has performed exceptionally well, his way of approaching the targets and how he's been able to manage or achieve that would be kind of discussed with other employees within the organization, and the idea would be to kind of help the other sales managers learn in terms of a different approach which he has applied that has allowed him to be successful. So that is something which is learning from experience. So example here would be, you are a sales manager, you go and meet our regular clients. But one of the sales manager, apart from meeting the regular clients to get business, also does cold calling to be able to develop new clients, because if he feels that if some of his clients do not give him enough business, then in order to achieve his targets, he still needs to prospect and look out for new clients that he can acquire, which will help reach that or bridge that gap in terms of sales performance or sales target that he wants to achieve. Now, this proactive approach of doing cold calling, taking help from the marketing team or from the call center internally to say that, okay, I've got a base of these clients which I've worked with earlier. Can you do a bit of calling, fix appointments for me so that I can go out and see and prospect business, has led him to achieve his targets or exceed his targets, could be shared as an experience with other sales managers who may have been not very proactive in terms of their approach, and that is where it can also be learning from experience. Then we look at something which is as we say, best practice, repeating something which is good. Now here what we look at is, in most organizations, best practices over the years, if something is working well, they're adopted as best practices, and these best practices are then shared with a different type of employees who are doing the same type of roles, so that they are able to learn from this and basically look at achieving something which has been tried and tested in the past. Now sometimes these could also backfire, and if they backfire, that means when I say they can backfire, is that means some of these things have become obsolete, or they cannot be tried or tested anymore. So sometimes by employing some of these things, the organizations also discover that some of the things which used to work, things like telephone calling, for example, again going back to the example of sales, or things like emailing, but because of the change of laws of GDPR and stuff, some of these things cannot be used on a blanket basis. So sometimes it is good to look at repeating something which has been done in the organization previously, but if it backfires, then it allows the organization also to course correct its action. Now, what we look at is when we look at the benefits of review, it also helps us in dealing with weaknesses. And that's a very good point. Why do you do a review? Why do you look at revisiting something as a concept? Is because you want to find out what has gone well, what has not gone well, where is the area that we have been let down on, and sometimes you look at reviewing things to see what has contributed to the downfall, or what has contributed to it not being a success. So review is one of the things which can also come across from something called performance management or performance appraisal. Now, acknowledging success, you see that after a review is done, performance appraisals are done within the organization, you will see that employees are rewarded. Their successes or the milestones they've been able to achieve are kind of rewarded, and this is done primarily because the organization wants to acknowledge success, create this as a bit of a best practice, or as a success story within the organization, to create motivation, to create loyalty, and also to spread the benefits of something good within teams and within the organization, to highlight this or this as an example. So sometimes when you look at acknowledging success is also something which is one of the benefits of doing performance reviews. And in general, if I have to just summarize, what do we look at summarizing? When staff performances, they help to review, recognize team members who have been performing well, exceedingly well, or have done or achieved targets and have contributed to achieving the organizational goal. They are also done to primarily look at having an open system of communication. So as you see in the first picture which I had shown, in slide 1, it's a continuous process of two-way feedback, communication, monitoring, development, reviewing, and that tends to keep it going within the organization. And also, what the result of performance reviews are, that it leads to, let's put it this way: if you don't have a review at the end of the year, how would you know that you're in line for promotion, a rise in salary, or some sort of incentives, because you've achieved your objectives 100%? So there are lots of review benefits of review. Now, in this particular slide, I want to highlight, when you do a performance review, what kind of benefits or things which can be related to the review. So when you look at organization-wide, performance appraisals happen throughout the year, and once a year throughout the organization, all organization, big, small, whatever format they take. Now they are implemented. When you look at organization-wise, performance reviews are done to look at savings. They are looking at basically accountability, productivity. They are also looking at retention, retaining the best staff for the employees. They also are a system of communication, and last but not the least, they are an output of what the organization has achieved. But at the supervisor and manager level, if I look at now differentiating into types of employees, the supervisor manager level, they are looking at, making efficiency and productivity savings. So time savings, how to reduce conflicts within teams, how to increase efficiency, consistency, and performance. That is what is going to be reviewed in the appraisals of managers and supervisors. But when it comes to employees, they are also a source to understand, how do managers, organization clarify expectation of employees? How do they look at self-improvement techniques? Say, for example, when I say training and development, what kind of career progression can be planned, and how satisfied are employees within their job? Those are the outputs that come out of performance review, at various levels within the organization. So when you look at organization-wide, these are some of the macro objectives which the organization wants to achieve from doing the review. For managers and supervisors, that's the objectives, and for employees, this is the objective. Let's look at secondly, the second assessment criteria, which is looking at what are the sources of information through which you get this key data to be able to do reviews and then put corrective action plans in place. So when I look at, these are broadly the sources of information. Performance appraisals, you do 360-degree feedback, there is client feedback or customer feedback, and then obviously what results the employees have been able to achieve against their objective set. So when I look at performance appraisal, you will see that performance appraisal basically is a system developed by HR. And here, the HR is primarily responsible for creating job descriptions, how they are, kind of bent with the requirements of the organizational vision and strategy of the organization, and how to a certain extent they relate to competitors' strategy when these kind of things are created. So when we look at doing performance appraisals, one of the key bits that we look at, and I've put a bit of a slide here, that what is the relationship, when we look at with HR, is something that we need to understand. So according to Applebaum, and the research that he did, he argued that organizational performance is best served by employees who have the ability to do work, they possess the necessary skills, and have the knowledge and motivation to be able to do the work when given the opportunity to exercise their skills. So here, when we look at performance appraisals, we do get to see that HR plays a very central role. It is they are central because they are the ones which are responsible for breaking down the organizational vision, mission, and the key strategy which has been given by the board, and then translate that into a job description or day-to-day responsibilities for employees. And last but not the least, they have the responsibility to be able to put the right set of employees for the right set of roles, so that they put the organization on a path wherein it can succeed. If you put people with not having the skills into roles which are requiring those skills, then obviously you're not going to achieve the objective. So HR does that matchmaking using the performance appraisals, the CVs, the information that they're able to gather. If we go back to the process of recruitment and selection, but they are the ones which basically look at utilizing this as a bit of an information. Now, one or two other things which I want to look at before I get into other methods through which the sources of information can come in. One is KPI. What is KPI? Now, KPI is key performance indicators. Now, these are indicators which the company sets against the business objectives, and they need to be met by employees. And as long as you're hitting your key performance indicators or KPIs, these indicators are met, then they know that the organization is on the right path, the individual is on the right path to be able to achieve the goals and objectives. An example of this would be if, for example, if you work within a manufacturing organization, and one of the KPIs within a car manufacturing company is to improve quality, to reduce defects. Now, this is a strategic objective. Now, this is not something which can be done in a short time. This is something which can happen over a long period of time. Now, the other KPI that they do is, in order to improve quality, which is a strategic objective, they tie this into reduction of waste. Now, that is defined as, say, a KPI for the organization. Now, when do they want to reduce, and how, by what time? They put a specific target that by December 2020, we will look at aiming reduction in terms of waste within the company by 10%. Now, this target is specific, and this target needs to be realistic and achievable. Now, if this target is hit as an overall target by the organization or the department within engineering, they want to reduce waste, then this is seen to be something called a key performance indicator. And if the is achieved, then the organization is on target to achieve, reduction of waste by 10%. And there are some indicators that they will create, that where all wastage happens, how that can be minimized. But as long as this is being hit and they see a successive reduction, and if this is happening, then this is considered as something called KPI. One of the other things that we look at is 360-degree feedback. Now, what is 360-degree feedback? It is sometimes also called the multi-rater feedback. That means you take multiple sources, to be able to gather feedback about the performance of an employee. So this process would involve, peers, colleagues, external clients, customers, and to a certain extent, your line manager in HR. So everybody will have in the system the ability to be able to give you feedback to see if the person is, meeting and exceeding the criteria, or is the person, fit for that particular role. So organizations typically use 360 feedback to find, right fit, or basically the right fitment of, roles for the people with their skills. So what they tend to do is they do a bit of a feedback, about a particular role, and the person performing that particular role with customers, supplier, colleagues, peers, managers. And what they will do is then if they come, when they get the feedback, they have a full view or a full feedback from all different types of interactions which the employee does. And that is why this is called a 360 feedback. Now, there is something called client feedback and business results. Now, client feedback is if you are working in a job which is outward facing, that means you deal with customers, and in this case, your service, for example, the quality of service or the products and services that you sell to the customers, they sometimes tend to send you feedback or surveys to see that, oh, okay, how did I deal with you? And a typical example that I would give you is that nowadays when you look at services organization, you will see a lot of if you have a problem and you call up, say for example, the call center to get a particular service that I'm not, I'm having this problem, can you help me resolve this? So but it's just after this problem has been resolved by over the phone, he or she will say that I'm going to be after the call, you'll receive a short survey which will ask you for a bit of feedback in terms of how I provided the service, and if you can, would you be interested in taking that survey? Now that survey basically gives a direct feedback about the employee or the person who's actually given help or support in that particular situation. So that helps us picking up individual feedback from clients when you work within a services or a customer-facing organization. And similarly, when we look at business results, sometimes the evaluation is very clear on the basis of what you've achieved, what you've not achieved, and if the organization has not been able to achieve a target set, and if that is directly related to your underperformance, then it can be related to something called business results. Now, this is normally seen in places when you carry direct targets or your performance is linked to the organizational performance, and it more so generally happens in the case of teams. When we look at it can be clearly evaluated whether you contributed to the result or not contributed to it. Now, the last assessment criteria talks about reviewing your PDP or your personal development plan. So here, what I would suggest is if you go on to Moodle and basically look at a handout or a template which I put in, and that handout and a template basically looks at giving you some idea in terms of how you would review your own personal development plan in context to I would say the context of progress when you look at your own development. So if I have to look at giving you that particular template, that template is this template, just as an example, which I've uploaded on Moodle. Now here in the learning outcome 2 and 3, you've created a PDP, and that PDP basically had some overarching objectives. They were broken down into some smaller objectives, and then you did your SWOT analysis and your skills audit. And then once you identified your gap areas or the areas that you want to develop, you turn that into something called a PDP or a personal development plan. So this personal development plan looked at setting some objectives which are from the top. You break them down into how you will achieve them, what are the activities that you need to undertake, what are the resources required, how will you measure success, and then you put some sort of a timeline. Now, this plan that you've created actually now needs to be reviewed for the distinction activity. So what you have to do is this plan that you've created has to be reviewed against the outcomes that were set and have you been able to achieve those outcomes. So the ones that you've achieved, you can shade them in green, which shows that this has been achieved, and you move on to the next one. And if you've not been able to achieve, they will be set further as further objectives, so that you are able to follow through and then review this plan 3 months down the line to say that, okay, have these objectives been met or not met. So with this, we will come to the end of learning outcome 4 and this particular unit, which is personal leadership and strategic management, personal development for leadership and strategic management. And my suggestion would be to now look at the assignment brief and then get into it to start attempting this, assignment, which is up on Moodle. There are 4 tasks. There are some past activities, and the extension activities are basically the merit and distinction activities. So if you look at the assignment brief, it has given you a bit of a scenario, and then that scenario basically it is asking you to assume that you're working as a senior manager, and you have been given some interesting posts, and you're registered with a recruitment agency called Harris Hall, and you have to basically look at now with the responsibility of now making your next career move. So Harris Hall is sent guidance pack titled Preparation of Application and Interviews, which includes some tasks for you to complete. This would form the foundation of the application you will make, and you're required to produce an information pack for section 1. So here you have to cover these tasks, analyze your knowledge, skills in leadership and strategic management. Please make use of the skills audit template, which I provided earlier, which is on Moodle. And this skills audit template will allow you to kind of do that audit for you to be able to, analyze your strengths and weaknesses, which you have, which is this tool here, to be able to, analyze your strengths and weaknesses and complete task 1. Second, it talks about, access the that factors have other skills and knowledge in leadership. This is something to do with, theoretical aspect, which you have to cover using presentation. And there's a handout that I've given, which basically relates to the factors influencing vision of an organization. The last one is also theoretical. It talks about review of leadership and management theories. There's a handout which I've given primarily, which looks at, review of the leadership theories. So you need to basically summarize this here, and that will help you complete the past task. In the merit, it says justify the ranking of leadership and management knowledge skills required to successfully create and achieve organizational strategy. I would suggest that you refer to one of the handouts which I've given, which is primarily, the assessment template that you've used, this one, and then relate some of the 6 factors which I've covered in learning outcome 1 presentation, which are required for you to be, a successful leader or exhibit leadership and management qualities. And now, in terms of the distinction, it talks about evaluation. So the same task that you're doing in the merit activity has to be evaluated by submitting more arguments to say why do you think these skills are important. Things like change management, project management, communication, time management, why these skills are important when you work within the organization and you exhibit the, the qualities of leadership and a manager. In task 2, we are asking you to look at the second part of the file enables you to develop your own personal knowledge and skills in leadership and management. This requires, the creation of personal and organizational vision strategies. So here, what you have to do is basically do an audit of your own leadership and management skills. So in this, what you have to do is use the skills audit template, which has been provided. And in that skills audit template, do the skills audit. And then what you need to do is develop this into a PDP. And the PDP example template I've given here in Moodle, as you can see. So here you will use the skills audit template and the personal skills audit template, and then develop this into a PDP. And this PDP is primarily going to be not a personal PDP, but related to the organizational goals. So here I would say Harris Hall, which is a recruitment organization, and when he's, they are looking at, you can choose an organization of your choice, but what you have to do is relate the development of your leadership and management activities in the PDP to organizational goals. The extension activities focus on, setting clear objectives. You have to show how your objectives are matching the organizational vision and strategy. So maybe take an example of a business that you work in or your own company, and you say how you are working towards setting objectives for yourself, which allow you to also help achieve objectives of the organization. And then in the distinction activity, it is asking you to basically look at, carrying out the activities which are required for you, which you identified in the skills audit as development activities and you have to put some timelines to it and activities to it to be able to say that this is how I'll go and achieve it. And in task 3, what we're asking you to do is basically look at a bit of this is theoretical. So when you go to learning outcome 2 in particular for this, you're looking at putting in theoretical factors, reading theory, and basically picking up an organization in vision and mission, and then developing it using a table to show how the organization's vision and mission has changed over the years, and how is it different in terms of interpretation for internal and external stakeholders. So in the 4th task, you're basically reviewing your PDP, the one that you've created in learning outcome 2, and you are basically looking at using that template, which is the handout 4D1. You want to look at primarily reviewing the performance against what you planned and what set of activities you've achieved when you decided on the PDP. And the task 5 basically talks about report in which you will review the best against the outcome. So in the PDP itself, towards the end, what my suggestion would be that when you say you've achieved this, you have to basically link it to why you've achieved this. So this is something that you have to do to be able to achieve distinction. But the tasks 4 and 5 are related. In task 4, it talks about the review of your personal development plan and how is it related to your organization. You can take your company of choice or the company which you work in. And in task 5, you're looking at the activities which you have completed, which have allowed you to develop that skill, which have to be presented in the form of a table. So I hope that this session has been useful, and the assignment discussion that I've just given some highlights or brief pointers to in terms of how to assess should help you to do the assignment. And then if you have any questions, queries, please feel free to come back to me, and I'll come back. I've uploaded the copy of the presentation and the handouts for today's session onto Moodle. If you have any queries, questions, please do come back to me, and I'll take it from there. Thanks so much for joining, and I'll catch up with you in the next session. Take care, and bye for now.